everyone. Thanks for being here. As has been said before, welcome to UCLA. I'm starting my 5th year. I'm an assistant professor, and I'm in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, which is in the Social Science Division of UCLA. And I'm also a faculty resident, which means that I live here on campus and have 8,000 students as my neighbors. So I like to think it gives me a little inside perspective, a bit, into our students' thinking and lives. So before getting into my topic, which is large lecture teaching and how to foster engagement, specifically through creative assignments, I want to share just a little bit of what I walked in with that first year I started here at UCLA. This is a picture of my actual undergraduate school. We were the kind of people that sat on the lawn in circles, went to our faculty's houses, and cried and laughed in their offices. And this was my vision of the type of teacher I was going to be. And then at the end of my first year here, my department asked me to teach our large survey. And by large, I mean enormous. It had 800 students, 2 sections of 4 students each, 2 hours of lecture, 16 TAs. I never taught a lecture class in my life, and this was like my welcome to lecture teaching. And it's a required major course in a GE, so you get a variety of people there, many who are drawn to the topic due to, personal experiences or interest in the political moment, but others who are there for a grade and to check some marks off. So it's a diverse audience that I was working with. And when they asked me to teach this course, this was my reaction, right? Junior scholar, yeah, I can do that. That sounds great. Thank you for the opportunity, But it was quite daunting. But I learned that fostering student engagement was not an insurmountable task. So maybe we weren't sitting on the lawn together, but there were things I could do to try to have the pedagogical model that I had been drawn to in the first place. So having learned from earlier sessions, of which I had the privilege of seeing PowerPoints for, my aim is that after this session, participants will have strategies for using creative assignments and large lecture teaching in order to foster student engagement and further learning outcomes. And I'm going to be drawing on my experiences teaching the large enrollment lecture course, faculty networks, and in particular, the scientific method of asking them on social media what their thoughts are, and scholarship on high-impact learning practices, including an internal study by the UCLA Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I will include a bibliography at the end for folks who are interested in these sources. So again, my initial fears about teaching the large lecture didn't account for the meaningful connections, fluidity, and interaction that many faculty here at UCLA have, in fact, successfully fostered in the classroom. So as Kumiko had mentioned, last year I was invited to be part of this incredible workshop called Faculty Teaching Faculty, small groups over lunch who are sharing their experiences of teaching. And I talked about the myths of the large lecture class. And in preparation for that, I asked, again, on Twitter and Facebook and my social media networks here at UCLA, what were faculty members' impressions of large lecture teaching? And I specifically asked them to identify their myths. What are the mythologies around it? And I wanted to share what some of those larger patterns were. So I share here just a few of dozens of responses from faculty here at UCLA. And what I saw overall is that, what a lot of people think of as a blank mass of students and an inability to connect between the lectern and the seats. Actually, people had fostered all sorts of meaningful connections. Maybe they didn't learn everybody's name, right? But there's a logic to the classroom that starts to take place over time. I know where, that's the women's baseball team, and that's Mecha. And those are the students I look to when I'm feeling bad about myself, and they smile and nod, But also things like they can encourage engagement. They could do group projects, and we've heard good examples of that here, that even when the classroom structure itself seems to be battling against you, things like bolted chairs, faculty find ways, right, to encourage group work and engagement. And there are a few examples in these quotes, which I won't ask you all to to read, but I'll read one. Here's someone who says, I teach a 78-person course and still have discussion and in-class source analysis and activities. It doesn't just have to be a lecture or the sage on the stage idea of teaching, right? And that was my fear walking in as a first-year faculty member. And across sources, they say, like, this can take extra work. It often does. But it does create room for improvisation, creative expression, group work, as well as blended pedagogy. And this is important because these are all examples of high-impact learning practices. And these are strategies that are shown to increase engagement and increase learning. And I'm going to read these examples, and this is, again, for that UCLA report. These are project-based and experiential learning, research projects, class discussions, reflective writing, cooperative learning and group projects, student presentations, using student inquiry to drive learning, and allowing students to select topics for course content. These are proven ways to engage specifically our students at UCLA. So if we look across the literature, they also celebrate these types of engagement. But important for me as a professor of Chicano studies, these practices show even higher impact among non-traditional students, meaning students of color, students of non-traditional college age, and commuters. So I want to spend the rest of my time sharing an example of a creative project I designed in my large lecture course. And through, I'm going to have small writing prompts for you to help you think through how you might adapt it for your own classroom teaching. So let's return back to my nightmare, or what I thought was a nightmare, which was teaching Introduction to Chicana and Chicano Studies. As described in the course catalog, it's an interdisciplinary survey of diverse historical experience, cultural factors, and ethnic racial paradigms, including indigenousness, gender, sexuality, language, and borders, that help shape Chicano identities, emphasis on critical reading and writing skills. So it's one part of a two-part introductory course that focuses on history and culture. So in the course, I designed 4 assessment measures. These include participation, so that's partly their discussion section grade, as well as a composition book with in-class writing, a traditional midterm, which I'll talk more about, a take-home final comprised of 2 essay questions, and a non-traditional creative project, which is what I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about. So for now, I want to ask you all to just turn to your own papers or tablets or whatever you're using for notes, and I want you to ask for yourself and just jot down, what types of assignments do you routinely assign, or might you envision yourself routinely assigning? So just creating a sandbox for yourself. So you might be thinking of one class in particular or several courses. If you're currently developing a syllabi, maybe an assignment that a faculty member you once took a course with that you enjoyed. Okay. So now that you're building your sandbox, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do think, pair, share, right? So if you can just turn to the folks next to you and maybe share one of those assignments with them so you can start to get an idea of what people are doing around the room. So very briefly, just a minute. All right. So my intention is this exercise is that we start to begin to get an idea of the many types of assignments that our peers are teaching. So I see a few hands. Are these to share? Oh, thank you. Or we do this thing too. If you can hear me once, clap. Thank you. So we're not going to share out just for the interest of time, but hopefully within your pairs, you're starting to get an idea of the many types of assignments that people might be putting together, but also maybe your own sandbox will start to grow now. So I want to return to, there was a question prompt there. So I want to return to the midterm first. So in their first assignment in this course, I wanted to do something that would resemble a format that they'd already be familiar with. The majority of my students in this course are first years. The majority are taking it in their fall quarter. It's their first ever college course. And I wanted something, again, that would be familiar to them. So my midterm looks a lot like the AP history exam, right? Like a blue book exam. So I do keyword identifications and short essays. And the idea is that they can use the keywords that they've been gaining over the course of the quarter in order to answer the essay prompts. So the idea is that they're interchangeable pieces that can build towards a larger picture. I share the midterm to give some context for the creative project that I assigned, which is my focus here. And the creative project is one that takes this traditional format and it redesigns it into a creative project. And specifically, I ask them to do it in the form of a zine. What is a zine? Short for magazine. It's a do-it-yourself, self-published booklet. They were meant for circulation, often addressing niche or controversial or very personal topics. And it was a form of publication that was frequently used in the Chicana and Chicano movement among alternate print cultures, such as flyers, newsletters, et cetera. It's one of the many genres within it. So while the midterm and the zine might look radically different from one another if you were to place them side by side, they're actually both concerned with questions of keywords, but they approached them in very different ways. This is an excerpt from my zine prompts, which I'll read out. So it says, in a creative project examining a specific topic or event discussed in class, you will examine one of the main course themes. So I have 3 to choose from: social identity, immigration and migration, or the built environment. Within that, they can get more particular, but they have to fit within these general parameters. I continue. You'll present your theme in the form of a zine, a do-it-yourself booklet inspired by the rascuache sensibility of Chicana and Chicano art. Rascuache refers to kind of this, you make something new out of what you have sensibility. This is your opportunity to explore, develop, and debate your thinking about the central issues you have studied this quarter in relation to a topic that is of particular interest to you. And in designing my prompt in this way, I'm really seeking to engage a few of the high-impact learning practices that I was drawn to. So there's room for student selection, there's room for personal reflection, there's the experiential in terms of making the zine themselves, and it's project-based. They'll have something very solid at the end of the assignment. And we'll get into the specifics in a bit, but I want to use this opportunity for another exercise. So thinking about one of those assignments in your toolbox, what are the desired skills or learning outcomes from one or more of those? So if you were to boil down that assignment into what is its purpose, go ahead and think through what are the tangible skills or learning outcomes that you want from one of them. Let's go ahead and take another minute. And again, each of these questions is meant to build, so towards the end of this, you will have kind of a plan for creating a creative project of your own. Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. So from a curricular perspective, there are a few reasons why I shift from a midterm to a zine at this point in the quarter. Part of it is that students are just more familiar with these concepts, right? They have more fluidity with them. They're more comfortable with them. They're able to do something that can build on that first level knowledge of the keyword exercise. More so, it goes along with what we're learning in the curriculum at that point in time. So by the second half of the class, we're really shifting to thinking about the expressive culture of Chicana Chicanos and their allies. And in particular, we talk about the Chicano social movement into the 1990s. So this means also dealing with a lot of questions around social identity that students themselves are often grappling with as they enter college. So these are questions that have strong resonance for them, things like ethnic identification, feminism, and the Chicano movement, to sexuality and theorizations of queer Aslan, all which lend themselves to the zine form. More so, zines themselves are a subversive print culture that was frequently used by the social movements that we're learning about. So as you think about your own courses, it is not the zine itself that is important. Rather, for me, it was about teaching my students to recognize multiple forms of knowledge production as important as text, to create a deliverable with life beyond our classroom, and for putting into practice what they were learning about. So making will look different in each of our disciplines. So again, just one of these questions. What formats or mediums are used in your discipline to create or share knowledge? The zine was a natural extension for me in Chicano studies. But if you're in a different field, it might be something, for instance, like a brochure or a textbook or a YouTube video or a social media account. So go ahead and just take some time to think about what those alternative mediums are outside of a traditional essay. I will get into assessment a little bit further into the talk, but I do have a rubric that my TAs use to grade, and I have 16 TAs in the course for 800 students. Yeah. All right, so let's spend just a few moments sharing what some of these alternative formats are, because I think that's actually really interesting to think about. What are the many ways that people produce knowledge within your fields? All right, let's go ahead and come back together. So just again to reemphasize that from a pedagogical perspective in assigning this creative project or a creative project, I'm aiming to adopt practices that have a high record for having high learning impacts. Separate studies at UCLA, University of Washington, among others, have found increased learning and engagement. Again, I mentioned the particular benefits for non-traditional students. Some of the deliverables that they found is that students express greater interest in course material, they receive higher grades in courses, they're attained at higher rates. And I just want to emphasize how important I think this is at a public university like UCLA. But in particular, as a Chicano Studies faculty member, this was something I was really thinking about in my course design. So I'm going to talk about the zines themselves and then move on to assessment and kind of some of the larger engagement deliverables that came out of that. So students were instructed to include the following components in their zine: a cover art with a title, 5 keywords, again, similar to the midterm definitions. I used word limits because they were often using handwriting and such. It was a way to assess them. 5 media entries that were remixed or new in some way. So examples of these were poetry, collage, crossword, for instance, and a bibliography of 5 course sources. So the assignment was not meant to be a research paper, so I really wanted them to, or an independent research paper, I wanted them to engage with the materials in the course. But with this added component of thinking seriously about the relationship between media and text. And this is a skill that we built through in-class exercises, such as close readings of photographs. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of skip over this question, but this is one of the big ones to think about. Like, how might you translate one of your more traditional assignments to a format or medium that is used in your field? So do you have a midterm that can be a brochure, or I just heard the great example of a podcast or a zine, and how might that help you develop some of your learning outcomes? But I wanted to spend some time focusing on evaluation because it is not your typical kind of graded assignment. So I definitely found that in terms of evaluation, students could find the word creative to be daunting. Like, what does that mean, right? How am I creative? So I thought it was really important to be upfront with my learning goals as well as how they would be evaluated. Part of what I had to do was reassure students that they weren't being assessed on whether or not they were a great artist, right? I wasn't teaching them art skills. That's not something they would be assessed on. And that there were multiple ways to do the project well, right? So one A+ zine might not look like another A+ zine, but as long as they're hitting all of the criteria in the rubric, which I shared with them, that they would be successful in the endeavor. So together we reviewed our 3 areas of evaluation, and this included meeting the general criteria, which we talked about in the previous slide, effectively linking their keywords with their media pairing. So again, that's thinking about that relationship between media and text, and these are some of the measures that I share with them. And then the strength of their overall thematic analysis through engagement with materials from the second half of the course. I also designed additional support mechanisms so students could revisit the zine at various points through the second half of the quarter. And that was really important because a big part of what was daunting about the zine was not having done it. So as soon as they started, it was like, oh, this is possible. This isn't too hard. And ways that we helped facilitate that is that we had a class visit by the zine librarian here at UCLA at Powell, who talked about the history of zines. We dedicated an internal discussion section to a zine workshop, and I provided things like arts and crafts materials because I was thinking about what might be potential financial barriers as well. The TAs created a worksheet flow sheet that was basically like a check sheet, like, do I have these 5 keywords? How do these lead back to my major theme? What is my supporting evidence, right? All the things that we would look for when assessing more traditional forms of assignments as well. And we held a zine office hours, which created this opportunity for students to come together, work with the zine librarian, have materials on a table, look at what their fellow classmates were doing, and these were held several times throughout that second half of the quarter. So some of the things you might ask yourself when putting together a creative assignment is, where can your students go for further resources when embarking on a creative project? So again, there are things like the library. You'll have the workshop later where you get to meet with the different folks involved in teaching and engagement here. Those are all fantastic resources. But you might also think about where you're going to go for resources. It's extra work to do something like this. It was for me, at least. And things that helped me is, there's something called the Affordable Course Materials Initiative. Write that down. It's awesome. It's through the UCLA Library. You have to apply for it. There is a cash stipend, small one, that you'll receive as well if you're a recipient. But the big bonus is that you're paired with a UCLA librarian that will help you think through affordability in your course. So they'll help you do things like find ebook versions or purchase ebook versions of the text that you're assigning. And you get to work with a librarian who will help you troubleshoot and think through how UCLA resources can help you in your course assignment. So that's how I got connected with the zine librarian, and also learned a lot about copyright in terms when thinking about questions around images. And there's also arts engagement, which is awesome. Again, a resource on the Hill that I'm not sure will be here today, but another one to look out for. So what was the end result? Come the end of the quarter, we collected 800 original zines on topics of social identity, immigration and migration, as well as the built environment. And I made a 1-minute slideshow to show you some of these zines. I also brought a bunch if folks want to go through them. Maybe I'll just start passing somewhere else. But here you can start to see some of the thematics.
Soy el tipo que camina, domina el territorio, con los ecobios lo propio, las cosas funcionan como de costumbre, así en la cumbre se fuma día a día, escucha nuestro trabajo de abajo, la guapería, rebeldía, de entrar en el sistema, soy el tipo que siempre la lleva, no temas, en si tu party te darán el tema y un poquito de componte para la pelea, no creas, tumbarte me daría pena, así que búscate un revólver, aplica la condena, no puedes agarrarme, y ese es tu dilema, y si te agarro, mira chico, estás en un problema. Si tu pare, mala vida nunca callo hueso, si tu pare, si tu pare, sin salida.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the afterlife, and then we'll wrap it up. So in assigning this project, part of my motivation was a desire to create something with a public component. Part of it is that I think that students are really excited and engaged when they know that their projects will have a life outside of the classroom. But part of it is also like, I have 800 students and their creative powers. Like, what do we got to do something, right? So building on the zine genre, which depends on circulation, students had the option of donating their zine to the UCLA Library's permanent collection. So some of the results were that several of the most outstanding zines were processed for public circulation at the UCLA Library, so you can check them out now. And the rest that wanted to donate them are archived now at the Chicano Studies Research Center's archival collection. The zines also served as the basis for a public exhibit at the UCLA Library titled Las Causas, Zines from the Chicano Studies Research Center Archive. And reflecting the students remixing of multiple library resources and making their zines, one was even the recipient of the campus-wide Library Special Collections Prize for Undergraduate Research. And I share this to reaffirm that this project is not just fun, and it is, but it promotes effective learning. So as you're thinking about your own creative projects, you might think also about how you can tap into UCLA resources in order to help your creative project have a life beyond the classroom, because our students are amazing and capable of things of great import. So in the end, I found that assigning zines helped to foster student engagement with large survey courses by designing my assignment to reflect the very forms of creative expression that we were learning about in the classroom. More so, it allowed students to apply course themes to topics of importance to them, particularly around ideas of social identity. And it allowed students to work on projects with a life beyond the classroom, showing them that they too, like the people they were reading about, could be creators of new knowledge with public resonance through creative output. Thank you. And I share here just a list of selected resources. I'm not sure if there's going to be an email out afterwards, but I'm happy to share the presentation with anyone who's interested. No pressure. I'll also do a plug. I'm on Instagram and share like my ideas around teaching and such, and it's a good way for me to connect with my undergrads and grad students. If you want to follow, at Dr. Jenna Carpio. Well, thank you for your time. So the question was, are there ways to think about how to even further expand the public impact or component of this kind of work? And I think, yes. I don't know that I could have done it that first iteration. So much of it was just like, please, classroom, do not burn down, you know. But I think that, you know, some of the ways in the future I would definitely like to engage more are inviting zine makers themselves and having them come and speak to the students about this is something that's not just historic, but continues to be a form of conveying information, especially in like the era of Amazon, right? Like what do we do with zine culture? And to start to think creatively about who could other community partners be. And in particular, the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach recently had an exhibit on print culture. And at the very end of that exhibit, they had a zine display. So I was able just to talk briefly with the curator there. So I don't know what might come out of that. But I do think it's important. In the first iteration, I really kind of focus on here are authors, here are scholars that you can connect with. But if I'm very serious about the point of the zine project, which is thinking about alternative forms of knowledge production, then I think it's a worthy investment to think about also bringing in those thinkers into the classroom as well. That's a fantastic question. And the other one, last thing I was thinking about, was partnering, potentially it would be, I'd have to figure it out, but with a community organization to create some of the themes. That way, if they wanted to use the zines in their work, then, you know, it could be a deliverable with a bit more impact too. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I really wanted them to think seriously about the relationship between the two. So they were assessed together. So might have the prompts here. Yes. So it was about accurately defining their keywords, having the connection to bibliography, so we knew what text they were drawing upon. But the media object, it wasn't about the quality of it per se, but that it was original or remix or rasquache in some sense of the word, and that they could relate it back to the image. So we were doing these exercises in class where they were asked to do the same thing, not creating images of their own, but assessing images in class alongside the text that we were reading so that they could build a skill set that allowed them to do that. And those were great assignments in class too, just kind of branching out from typical lecture.
Okay, thank you, Jenna.
Thank you so much.